Moving on to our second segment of the day, we're bringing in Miss Jenny Horn, a contributor, as you know, across the TD Ameritrade Network, to talk about our second stock of the day, and that is HOG, or Harley-Davidson. HOG, one of the best call letters of any stock that we cover here. HOG. So Jenny Horn, what do you have for us today in Harley-Davidson? Now, they have earnings April 20th, so the beginning of, I believe it's Tuesday before the open. Jen, what do you have for us in Harley-Davidson?
Yes, they do have earnings next Tuesday, Kevin. And full disclosure, I have never been on a motorcycle, but I can study the trends here and look at least the price activity. They're up about 80% in the last year. And I actually compare them very closely to a Winnebago, which obviously also saw great success over the last year. They ran up hugely. I think this is just due to the fact that so many people wanted a way to get out of their homes while being socially distant, while also feeling like they could sort of explore the outdoors. Harley-Davidson was also sort of a beneficiary of this similar sentiment. Now, when it comes to Harley-Davidson, they are so much more than just a motorcycle company. They're really a whole culture, whether it's the people, the apparel they offer, just the sounds of the motorcycles, or the open road ahead. This sort of entices so many people. But there's this thought that as more people look for less disruptive means of transportation, that Harley-Davidson's culture is actually dating itself. And also, the market for Harley-Davidson is getting smaller. Many people believe this customer base is aging, with so many baby boomers now aging, of course, and that people that are interested in owning motorcycles is shrinking. And thus, getting new customers has been very difficult for this brand. Now, their earnings, like we both just mentioned, next Tuesday, they are expecting to see pretty significant growth, with revenue rising about 11% from a year ago and earnings rising about 69% a year ago. So again, pretty strong sentiment there. And BofA Securities actually issued a super bullish note on Harley-Davidson yesterday, saying that the stock is now poised to trade at a premium relative to its historical performance, given some of this earnings upside we're seeing and also accelerating brand momentum. BofA also highlighted there's sort of long-term opportunities in the motorcycle space, with margin recovery expected to top about 15% versus the 5 to 7% expected. Plus, they are growing internationally, namely in China, which of course the street really likes. Now, under the CEO, the company's branding has sort of been reset. They are now launching the Adventure Tour with the Pan America 1250, which will be available at dealers this coming May. Another huge favorable factor for Harley-Davidson, which I think is namely the most important at this time, is they have their own dedicated EV segment of their business now, with hopes to sort of push into electric motorcycles in the long term. Now, if you were taking a more bearish stance on this name, you would say that this company is sort of going away slowly. So like you say, the long goodbye. Revenue has fallen for about half a decade, and the strategies to get into the electric vehicle market are sort of lagging, other companies that have seen such success. Another thing is their core business is really showing very little signs of a turnaround, other than this last year when, of course, they saw this heightened demand with so many people just stuck in their homes. And if you were, saying that potential layoffs could be any negative indication for this company, many people on Twitter agree with you this morning. And there was actually the first tweet that popped up had to do with some of this company restructuring. So our first tweet says, Harley-Davidson laid off at least 640 people last year as sales continued to fall. The CEO said it hurt morale. Anyway, the company gave the CEO $9.4 million, a 24% raise over CEO pay from the prior year. It also gave its ex-CEO a $4.1 million severance. So I thought what was most interesting about this tweet was just the restructuring and the layoffs, which you could say would be negative sentiment for the company. I don't necessarily care so much about how much the CEOs get paid, because I think being a CEO is a difficult job, but there was a lot of negative sentiment around this tweet, just, Harley-Davidson's lagging balance sheet. And another thing with Harley-Davidson is many people feel, an overwhelming majority of Twitter this morning feel, that it is not doing a good enough job appealing to, say, a younger consumer like myself. If you watch Harley-Davidson's commercials, they are mostly older people. So that's kind of where it seems like they're missing, which brings me to our next tweet, which says, Harley-Davidson is an example of a great brand who didn't evolve to changing consumer preferences. Think about what they could have been if they considered next-gen customers in their heyday. So I think this is interesting because how could you possibly predict what the younger generation is going to like? I think that's impossible. I mean, we could have never foreseen that an app where people like dance and make short videos like TikTok would have seen such huge success. So I don't know if it's possible to predict the future trends, but what I do know is that Harley-Davidson has to sort of market this younger audience. And I think the EV space is the way they do that. I think that right now, we're not seeing enough from them in this electric vehicle space. And you look at a GM that's pushed hugely into electrification, and they've seen success from that. So I think that's really where they're lacking. And say they could possibly make their motorcycles appear more clean and environmentally friendly. That to me would be a selling point for Harley-Davidson, Kevin.
Jenny, you know some of my children, and so you probably know that there's a rule in my family that says any of my children are allowed to buy a motorcycle on the way home from my funeral with their inheritance. So that is the rule that I have. So we are in a motorcycle family. So the fact that you have never been on a motorcycle makes you a pseudo member of my family. Now, that being said, Jenny, as we look to a place like, you are the voice of the millennial on this show, Jenny. So my question to you is, do you know anyone or any group or what percentage of people that in your social circle have any type of motorcycle or two-wheel apparatus?
A few, not really, a few, but no, I mean, not, and I watch commercials and I'm like, they are totally missing on marketing to me because I see people that are much older than myself and I don't know anyone really other than a few select that have a motorcycle. They're not cheap. So I think there's a lot of factors sort of stacking against this target. I mean, even some of the analyst reports I read were like, they're missing on Gen Z. And I'm like, whoa, those people are way young to be buying a motorcycle. So yeah, I think their marketing is missing here, Kevin.
Exactly.
All right, Kevin, I'm back here with you guys. Kev, let's say goodbye to Jenny. Great setup here. Thanks for the setup. Harley-Davidson, motorcycles. Hey, maybe we're not the millennial motorcycle riders, but I'm sure they're out there somewhere. Jenny, great setup as always. As we say goodbye to Jenny, I want to welcome in Megan Brantley, the VP of Research at LikeFolio.com. Good morning to you, Megan, and thanks for joining us. This is one that popped up on your radar here. It's an earnings announcement for next week, so kind of a sneak peek look. Talk to us why this one's jumping out to you.
Yeah, so this is going to be a fun one today because really I think this is a story of just a brand losing its luster. I think the second tweet that Jenny showed was really good. It talked about these shifting consumer preferences and Harley just completely missing the boat and not following the consumer, not getting ahead of the consumer. We actually just capped off. So this quarter that they're about to report is the 10th consecutive quarter of year-over-year decline in consumer demand that we've registered. This is actually the lowest quarter that we've ever recorded in terms of consumer demand for Harley-Davidson. Right now, those mentions, people talking about buying a motorcycle, buying one of the bikes, buying even electric bikes, because they do have some electric bikes, those are cumulatively pacing down about 40% year over year. And so this is one of those instances where we do have a little bit of divergence. You know, last quarter, they did not have a good report. You know, sales were down, units were down, and I believe they posted a loss. And you saw, you know, the stock sold off about 13% after they, you know, released this information. And now it's recovered almost to exactly the same place that it was before that report. So, you know, we like to see that whenever we see demand heading one way and maybe the market heading a different way. You know, they did release this recovery plan. I think that they called it the hardwire. You know, they're talking about, you know, making capital investments. They're initiating a used bike program. They're starting to focus on this electric vehicle development, but at least short term, we're just not seeing this gaining any type of traction or any type of steam with consumers.
Yeah, Megan, this is one of LikeFolio's strongest talking points. When you see data in the opposite direction of the stock. And you're right. Yeah. They lost 44 cents last quarter, and the stock has basically rallied back to where it was pre-earnings. So now they claim, if you read news stories, that they've got, new models coming out that are hitting the dealers, and that's helping them. They also have financial services segment that's doing extremely well. That's what they say. But your data, at the end of the day, this company lives or dies by how popular and their ability to sell bikes and two-wheel motorized vehicles, right? So if they're not doing that, if the millennial consumer is not buying into the Harley, you can't keep selling to people my age forever, because eventually you run out of people my age. So give us a little more feedback on what you're seeing in terms of age of their consumer.
We don't exactly break down by demographics, but I can tell you, I think the story is not resonating with the chatter that we're seeing on social media. This whole idea of Harley, whenever you think about the story that they're selling, it's the sound that Jenny mentioned. That's something that they actually are trying to push, this like revving engine. That does not connect well that definitely doesn't connect well with me. I don't know about you guys, but that's not something that I'm looking for. And then you look at sentiment as a whole, and it's about 6% lower than something like a Polaris. And so we actually saw on Polaris's last report that they increased their, millennial new customer growth by 30%. They increased their, women customer growth by 40% in, fiscal year 20. So if you're looking for a company that has solutions that's actually, meeting this demand in a younger generation, and even for women like me, who I would never consider a Harley, I think that, maybe Polaris is your better pick if you're trying to think long term. Right now, we're just not seeing Harley make that connection with consumers. So, whenever you see this declining demand, you see, declining sentiment alongside that declining demand. Sentiment's fallen about 4 points year over year. Those two things, that's not a positive sign moving forward. So this is, if I were going to be betting on one, I probably wouldn't be betting on Harley, but definitely in the short term, this is one of the most bearish signals that we have for the upcoming week.
I think the key takeaway here, and again, Harley-Davidson could shock us all, so there's certainly nothing guaranteed here, but it sounds to me like a company that's fairly rigid, fairly traditional, and has an outlook on a product, and that user base, that consumer out there just isn't going to continue to resonate with it, and they're going somewhere else because a company like Harley is not meeting the needs of them anymore. It's a different consumer than it once was. And typically, companies that are like that tend to struggle until they realize it. And so it's gonna be an interesting thing. But the one thing that I have to comment on is the stock's done very, very well over the last year. So Megan, is this an interesting kind of? Clearly, it's a divergence play, is why it's come up on your radar. But is this a situation that can be applied beyond just maybe Harley-Davidson? If there's other names out there, if you're someone at home. Where basically it highlights this macro trend where so many things are being lumped in as reopening trades. We're going to go out and buy stuff. We just had a huge retail sales number, but not every company is going to benefit from that. There's going to be winners, there's going to be losers, and it looks like right now everything's being considered a winner. So is the opportunity potentially going to be to find these names that really don't have the demand but are rallying alongside their peers?
I think that you made a really good point. Harley has definitely benefited from this mindset. And, I think that it got a little bit of energy from this new plan that they've announced. People are hoping that this is a turnaround story. But our data at the end of the day just does not show any type of traction with consumers. It shows continued declining demand. And until we see a turnaround, this isn't the name that we're going to pick to bet on. If you're looking for a name in this space, I would, our data on Polaris looks much stronger, and it actually hosts a much happier consumer base. So if you're trying to pick out winners and losers, I think it's helpful to look at the whole segment, and comparatively, Harley is underperforming. From an earnings perspective, we ran rank these earnings scores on a scale from 100 to negative 100, and anything above that plus or minus 10 starts to give us, a lean in terms of bearish or bullish. And Harley's plotted at about a negative 65 heading into this next week. So, you got a couple of days, but this is one that, we're not expecting any type of really positive surprises, at least from a short term in terms of, actual unit sales perspective.
Good stuff. Megan Brantley, the VP of Research at LikeFolio.com, bringing a bit of maybe an overlooked name to us, and I like these, especially the ones that have the big divergence. Good stuff as always. Thanks for joining us. Look forward to talking.
Thanks, guys.